Have you ever asked yourself, why is it that the gentler I am, the more others seem to push their limits? Why does trying so hard to be a good person often leave me feeling invisible? No one says it outright, but you feel it deeply in the glances, in the subtle reactions from those around you. You speak with presence and care, but no one really listens. You offer help sincerely, only to be used, as if it's your duty. You step back to keep the peace, only to find there's no space left for you to stand. And the most painful part is, you don't know where you went wrong. Is kindness a weakness? Do you have to become cold and unyielding in order to be respected? No, the problem isn't kindness. The problem is how you bring your kindness into the world. You don't need to abandon your compassion, but you do need to learn how to armor it, so it's not dismissed, misused, or distorted. And that's exactly what Niccolò Machiavelli, a mind so misunderstood for centuries, pointed out long ago. He wasn't teaching you how to be cruel. He was teaching you how to be good without being crushed, how to love without losing yourself, how to set boundaries without apologizing for them. In this journey, we'll begin to untangle the hidden knots. Why do good people often get trampled? Why is our fear of setting boundaries a psychological inheritance? How can you earn respect without making people hate you? And most importantly, how can you become the kind person who doesn't need to be loved, yet compels others to respect you? This isn't just a journey of mindset, it's a journey back to yourself. Because if you don't choose your place in the hearts of others, they will assign you the lowest one and call it normal. 1. The common mistake: believing kindness alone is enough. From a young age, you were taught that kindness is a noble virtue, that if you are good to others, they will be good to you, that if you are polite, a good listener, generous, and selfless, the world will open its arms and embrace you. But then you grew up, and you started to sense something was off. You're the one who always steps aside, yet you're the one most often pushed around. You're always willing to help but rarely help in return. You speak gently, but others raise their voice at you. You avoid conflict to keep the peace, but end up being the one silently carrying the weight. And then you begin to realize, kindness alone is not enough for people to respect you. It's not enough to stop them from constantly testing your boundaries. Not enough for you to be truly heard, valued, or even treated as a person with real emotions. Psychology doesn't glorify unconditional kindness. In psychology, respect doesn't come from pleasant words. It comes from how you enforce your boundaries. The person who can say no is remembered. The person who walks away at the right time is taken seriously. The one who remains silent but firm is seen as composed and grounded. But the one who always says yes, always yields, always over-explains their kind intentions, sooner or later, they will be seen as someone easy to manipulate. Because you're sending out this signal: I have no fence, come in whenever you like. And in a world where self-interest often takes precedence, anyone without clear boundaries becomes an easy resource to exploit. Machiavelli, the first to challenge the illusion of unconditional kindness. Over 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "If you must choose between being loved and being feared, choose to be feared." Not because he glorified cruelty, but because he understood a harsh truth about human nature. People can forget favors, but they never forget boundaries. You can help someone 10 times, and they'll forget. But say no just once. Step back from an unfair dynamic, and that will be remembered. Machiavelli didn't say you should become ruthless. He said that kindness without strength will be dismissed. Kindness without strength is like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Imagine you're the person who always listens, always sacrifices, always keeps the peace. To some, you might be admirable, but to a manipulator, you're the perfect prey. You're like someone bleeding in the middle of the ocean. And the sharks, they don't care how kind you are. They only sense the scent of blood, the scent of someone who cannot protect themselves. That's the brutal truth you must face. You don't need to become cruel, but you do need to stop believing that kindness is enough. Because kindness, without backbone, becomes an open invitation for those who only know how to take, but never how to give. 2. The inner conflict. When kindness becomes a weakness. You once believed that kindness was something to be proud of. You used to think that if you treated others with sincerity, they would sense it and respond with equal decency. You believed that keeping the peace was wise, that patience was noble, that forgiveness was a higher virtue. But then, one day, you began to feel uneasy, not because someone criticized you, but because you could no longer look at yourself in the mirror without feeling wounded. You realized that you were slowly losing your inner peace, just to maintain the image of a good person in others' eyes. You said yes when your heart screamed no. You smiled when inside you wanted to cry. You kept giving, even when no one seemed to care whether you had anything left to give. Kindness without boundaries is not a virtue, it becomes a burden. At some point, you began to fear your own kindness, because you realized it made you easy to exploit. It kept placing you in the position of sacrifice. It made you forget what your real emotions even were. You found yourself trapped in a cycle of contradiction. You wanted to be kind, but feared being overlooked. You wanted to remain compassionate, but also wanted to be respected. You wanted to be that sweet, likable person, but you were starting to feel deeply hurt. The rise of suppressed anger. Those who are kind to the point of forgetting themselves don't stay gentle forever. They begin to feel anger, but because they're not used to facing their own anger, they suppress it, and it turns into resentment, then into prolonged silence, then into a quiet, invisible distance in every relationship. Kindness left unprotected becomes wounded goodness. And from that, a painful inner conflict emerges. If I stop being nice, am I betraying myself? Machiavelli didn't hate good people, he just wanted you to wake up. One of the most misunderstood things about Machiavelli is that he supposedly glorified cruelty. That's not true. He was simply one of the first to admit, in a world run by power, the naive will be crushed, not because they're bad, but because they are unprepared. You can have a kind heart, but if you don't know how to protect it, if you don't know when to pull it back after being exploited, then you are not being kind, you are being submissive, and that doesn't earn you more respect. On the contrary, it makes people stop seeing you as someone with inner worth. Kindness is not a weakness, it is a choice made in strength. True kindness does not come from the fear of offending others. It doesn't come from the fear of being disliked. It doesn't come from a craving to be loved. True kindness arises when you have enough inner power to say no, and yet you choose to give. When you could walk away, but you stay. When you could react, but you choose to remain silent at the right moment. When you could retaliate, but you choose to preserve your integrity. Kindness does not come from weakness. Kindness begins the moment you are strong enough not to be drawn into other people's games. 3. The deeper root, the syndrome of validation dependency. You used to think you were kind because you wanted to be. That your compassion was simply part of your nature. That you didn't resist, didn't get angry, didn't demand because you were more mature than others. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, is everything you call good truly the result of free choice? Or is it rooted in a fear of rejection? From childhood, you were programmed to please others. Most of us were never taught how to define our self-worth independently. Instead, we learned to live for praise, for love, for being good. When you obeyed, adults called you well-behaved. When you gave in, they said you were a good child. When you swallowed your tears, they called you strong. And just like that, every seemingly harmless compliment built a silent operating system within you. I only have value when others approve of me. The result, you become someone who doesn't know how to say no. You say yes, even when you're exhausted. You agree even when you silently object. You smile even when your heart is breaking. All for one thing, validation. You're afraid someone will think you're selfish. You're afraid of losing your place as the lovable one in their eyes. You fear the silence, the coldness, or that look of disappointment. What you don't realize is, you've become addicted to the feeling of being liked, and because you're so afraid of being disliked, you trade away your voice, your boundaries, and your self-respect. Machiavelli would say you're handing your psychological power to others. Machiavelli didn't speak about love, he spoke about power. And the first kind of power you must reclaim is not over others, but over the expectations you've handed them about who you need to be. You must start asking yourself, why am I afraid of making someone unhappy? Why do I need others to affirm that I'm a good person? Who made me believe that I must always be gentle and agreeable just to deserve to exist? And then you'll begin to see, you're not loved for who you truly are. You're loved because you fit what others want. And that is not love. That is a transaction wrapped in the costume of kindness. Being dependent on validation is a subtle form of manipulation, one you inflict on yourself. You live like a mirror, always reflecting the needs of others. You even know exactly what to say and how to behave, so no one feels uncomfortable. And you keep doing it until one day, you no longer know who you are when there's no one left to please. That's not kindness, that's a performance so convincing that even you believe it's who you truly are. So how do you escape this cycle? Not by becoming cold, not by declaring that you don't need anyone, but by looking yourself in the eye and admitting, I'm living for validation, and then, little by little, relearning how to live without needing anyone's applause on your shoulder. True kindness begins when you no longer need to be liked in order to keep being kind. You act not out of fear of loss, but because you've chosen it. From yourself, and no one else. 4. The solution: rebuilding your self-image with clear boundaries. After realizing that unconditional kindness leads to harm, after recognizing that you've been living for validation instead of authenticity, you may find yourself asking, what kind of person do I need to become? How can I avoid being taken advantage of while still remaining kind? How do I earn respect without instilling fear? The answer lies in a skill most of us were never taught. Establishing inner boundaries. Respect doesn't begin with words, it begins with presence. A person who is respected doesn't always speak much. Sometimes, your presence alone says everything. A calm gaze that doesn't avert, a silence that doesn't over-explain, a quiet but decisive withdrawal. This is no accident, it's the result of an inner life with boundaries. Boundaries aren't fences to isolate others, they are markers to protect yourself. When you lack boundaries, you're vulnerable to violations without even realizing it. Someone speaks disrespectfully and you laugh it off. Someone makes unreasonable demands and you silently comply. Someone repeatedly belittles you and you stay because you don't want to cause drama. You think you're keeping the peace, but in truth, you're surrendering your self-worth. Every time that happens, you send out a signal. I'm easy to control, and in a world driven by power dynamics, those who are easy to control are never respected. Machiavelli called this the art of protecting your image without saying a word. He once wrote, a ruler must learn to use the nature of both the fox and the lion, the fox to see the traps, and the lion to scare off the wolves. Meaning, you don't have to be aggressive, but you must be sharp enough to recognize danger and solid enough to stand firm against it. This applies perfectly to personal life. You don't need to threaten anyone. But if you know how to withdraw at the right time, stay silent in the right way, and say no without guilt, others will think twice before overstepping. How to rebuild your self-image with clear boundaries. Relearn how to say no. No apologies, no explanations, no sacrificing your well-being to make others comfortable. Just one simple sentence: this doesn't work for me. That's enough. Pause before reacting. Every manipulator targets your impulsive emotions. If you learn to pause just 5 seconds before responding, you'll throw them off, and you'll reclaim the upper hand. Stop proving yourself. You don't need to explain why you disagree. You don't need to defend your boundaries. Anyone who demands that you do is likely someone trying to cross them. Redefine kindness. Kindness is not a compromise. Kindness is deliberate action, and it should never involve self-erasure. You can be kind, but you must be a kind person with a spine. Respect isn't demanded, it's built through presence. Remember, you don't need to force anyone to respect you. You only need to live as if you do not allow yourself to be disrespected. Your presence, if grounded, will deter others from crossing your boundaries, even if you haven't said a word. 5. Learning from Machiavelli, not to promote cruelty, but to teach us the truth about power. For centuries, Machiavelli has been misunderstood. He has been called cold, ruthless, an instigator of tyrants. But people forget something essential. He didn't write to please moralists. He wrote to expose the truth of human nature. In The Prince, Machiavelli did not fabricate hope. He didn't lull readers with ideals of kindness, universal love, or moral fairness. On the contrary, he wrote, men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly in danger, and greedy for gain. You may not like hearing that, but some part of you knows it's true. You've helped someone, only to be abandoned when you needed help. You've stayed gentle and were pushed around. You've been forgiving and found yourself disrespected. Machiavelli didn't teach you to be wicked, he taught you to be awake. In a world full of people who compromise themselves to be liked, he simply said, if you cannot be both loved and feared, then choose to be feared. Not because he glorified fear, but because he understood this brutal truth: the love of the crowd is always conditional, but fear, if used wisely, can protect you from betrayal. People will love you as long as you serve their interests, but when you no longer serve those interests, that love disappears like it never existed. And if there's nothing about you that makes them think twice, you'll be the first piece sacrificed on the board. In politics or daily life, power stems from perception, not kindness. A weak leader obsessed with being loved is easily overthrown. A person who lives only to please others will be quickly dismissed. You can be kind, well-mannered, generous, but if you don't know how to draw boundaries, if you're afraid to say no, afraid to disappoint, then you're not being kind. You're being controlled. Machiavelli saw this clearly during the Renaissance, and it still applies in our modern society. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. In other words, the image you project matters more than your inner intentions. People don't know whether your kindness is genuine or a mask hiding pain and fear. They only see your silence, your submission, your pliability, and from that, they decide how to treat you. Power doesn't lie in threats. It lies in your ability to make people self-regulate around you. Machiavelli once said, "A wise ruler is one who is respected for his stability and strategy, not for emotional displays." Which means, you don't have to shout, intimidate, or flaunt power. You only need to live with principles and stick to those principles. When you are not emotionally shaken, when you don't react the way people expect, when you stand firm in the wind, you become someone who cannot be easily manipulated. And that, according to Machiavelli, is the model of a person who deserves respect and caution. How can you apply this to your everyday life? A spiritual backbone that doesn't bend under pressure. A personal code you don't break just to please someone. A clear understanding: I don't need to be loved at the price of being disrespected. You don't need to become cruel. You only need to ensure that your kindness isn't mistaken for weakness, because only when you can defend your goodness can it finally be recognized as a strength. 6. Drawing the line. The crucial difference between being feared and being hated. When we talk about becoming someone to be feared, many people immediately picture a cold, ruthless dictator, a figure who controls others through intimidation and dread. That is a grave misunderstanding, because being feared is not the same as being hated. In fact, there's a fine line between these two states, but if you understand it and walk it well, you'll tap into a subtle form of power, a power that doesn't need to be asserted, yet commands caution. To be feared is when people respect your boundaries. Picture someone you hold in high regard, not because they shout or behave harshly, but because there's something about them that makes you hesitant to cross the line. They don't talk much, but every word they say carries weight. They don't over-explain, but you know they can't be easily manipulated. They don't threaten, but you don't dare test their softness. That's the kind of fear Machiavelli spoke of. It doesn't stem from aggression. It comes from inner solidity, from a presence that causes others to instinctively adjust their behavior in your presence. To be hated is when people want you to fail, disappear, or be destroyed. In contrast, hatred is rooted in confrontation. People hate you when you insult their dignity, you impose power without a legitimate reason, you abuse authority and make others feel small or oppressed. A person doesn't need to be intimidating to be hated. They simply need to be unfair. And that's the trap many fall into when trying to appear strong. They assume they must be cold, arrogant, or distant to command fear. But in reality, they're breeding resentment, not respect. Machiavelli clearly warned against this. In The Prince, he wrote, "A prince may be feared, but he must never be hated." Why? Because healthy fear maintains boundaries. But brewing hatred quietly builds revolutions. Machiavelli didn't encourage cruelty. On the contrary, he believed wisdom lies in the strategic use of power, meaning, set boundaries, but don't impose domination. Be firm, but not humiliating. Be strong, but maintain fairness and dignity. How to apply this in daily life? How to be respected without being resented? Hold firm principles, but allow flexibility when needed. Those who are truly respected are not rigid, but consistent. You may adapt your methods, but never compromise your core values. Say no without making others feel rejected. Saying no isn't about asserting dominance. It's about protecting your space. And when delivered with calm and respect, people may not like your answer, but they won't despise you for it. Don't play power games, but don't invite tests. You don't need to prove you're above others. You only need to make it clear. Your kindness has limits, and crossing them has consequences. Respect yourself, so others have no choice but to do the same. Hatred often stems from perceived injustice, but if you are fair, direct, and grounded, people may not like you, but they will respect you. Why does this distinction matter? Because you cannot control how others feel about you, but you can influence what kind of emotion they associate with your presence. Would you rather be dismissed for being too soft, resented for being too harsh, or choose a third path, where you don't need to be liked, but the moment you walk into a room, everyone recalibrates? That is the power of being feared without being hated. It is a quiet power, but one that endures. 7. Entangling the psychological knot. Why you still fear setting boundaries? You already know you need to be firmer. You know you should learn to say no. You've heard all the advice that you must protect yourself, set boundaries, and stop living to please others. So why do you still not do it? You still say yes to plans you don't want to attend. You remain silent when others say things that hurt you. You pretend to be agreeable while inside you're brimming with anger, fatigue, and disappointment. The answer isn't a lack of knowledge. It lies in old emotional wounds you've never named. They won't let you say no. They won't let you go against anyone's expectations. And every time you try to stand up for yourself, they whisper in your mind, "Don't do that. They'll hate you. They'll leave you." You don't fear boundaries. You fear their consequences. You don't fear refusing. You fear the disappointed look, the heavy sigh from someone you love, the quiet withdrawal, like an invisible punishment. And that fear wasn't born on its own. It was planted early when you were still a child. Every time you pushed back, you were scolded. Every time you voiced your real emotions, you were told you were rude, ungrateful, or difficult. So you learned to abandon yourself just to preserve someone else's affection. You became a kind person not because you chose to, but because you once feared rejection, feared being unloved, feared losing your place in someone's heart. Worst of all, you feared being bad for daring to think of yourself. You were taught that a good person is one who always yields, endures, and sacrifices, and if you do anything different, you're selfish, cold, ungrateful. So even when you know you're being used, controlled, or hurt, you still don't allow yourself to fight back. What would Machiavelli say about this? He wouldn't comfort you. He wouldn't say, "Just be kind, people will understand." On the contrary, he'd say, "If you don't set boundaries, others will set them for you by shrinking you down to fit their comfort." Machiavelli didn't write for those who want to be loved at all costs. He wrote for those who want to reclaim control over their own lives. And he knew no one is hated for setting boundaries. People only hate when you stop playing the role of the easily controlled. To untangle this knot, you must face your real emotions. It's not about learning better communication skills. It's not just about practicing the word no. It's about turning inward and asking, why do I feel guilty for saying no? Who was the first person that made me believe I had to be good to be worthy? Am I afraid of being left because deep down, I still don't believe I'm enough? You cannot set boundaries if, deep down, you still believe, I need others' approval to exist, and you will not be respected. If you don't dare defend your own true voice, entangling begins with starting over, rebuilding, step by step. You don't need to become unbreakable overnight. Just start with one sentence, "I don't agree," and allow yourself to endure the discomfort that follows. The cold silence, the confused looks, the initial loneliness. But after that, you'll notice something powerful. You're still here. You didn't disappear. You're not a bad person. You are simply returning to being someone with weight, with presence, with limits. And in that moment, you begin rebuilding a self with inner strength. 8. Final step. From overlooked kindness, right pointing arrow to kindness with backbone. You don't need to abandon your kindness. You just need to learn how to protect your dignity while being kind. Because kindness, without strength, becomes a burden. You listen, you help, you forgive, you appease, you sacrifice. And then what happens? People start to assume you'll always give. They stop asking, stop thanking. Worse, they begin to test your limits. And you, even when you sense the unfairness, still smile and continue yielding, afraid that if you change, you'll no longer be a good person. Kindness without strength is a subtle form of self-destruction. You gradually lose your edge. You slowly retreat from yourself to maintain the comfort of others. You give up your inner voice just to uphold your role as the reasonable, pleasant one. But the truth is, no one truly respects someone who always says yes. No one admires someone who can't protect themselves. You think you're maintaining harmony, but to others, it looks like you're willingly stripping away your own armor. And at some point, you're no longer seen as kind, but as someone easy to dismiss. A kind person with strength is not cold. They simply know where to stop. They know how to listen, but also when to stop when their kindness is being exploited. They know how to empathize, but not excuse disrespectful behavior. They know how to forgive, but not return to a place that once degraded them. They know how to be gentle, but also when to be firm in self-defense. Kindness is not a weakness. It only becomes weak when you lack an internal backbone to hold it up. You don't need to become harsh, distant, or indifferent. You only need to build an invisible boundary. A boundary that, kind or not, others will recognize and not dare to cross. If Machiavelli were alive today, he wouldn't tell you to be ruthless. He'd ask you just one question, asterisk. Is your kindness protecting you or exposing you to manipulation? And that is a question you need to answer honestly. Because if your answer is, I'm exhausted, I feel small, I don't feel truly respected, then it's time to transform that kindness into a strength with limits. Transformation doesn't require anger, it only requires awareness. To shift from an overlooked kind person right-pointing arrow to a kind person with backbone. You must realize you don't need to be loved if it means losing yourself. The affection of others will never be more valuable than the respect you hold for yourself. Know your boundaries and act when they're crossed. Don't issue warnings. Let your actions reset expectations. Redefine what kind means in your own eyes. A kind person is not someone who always endures. A kind person is someone who makes others feel safe and simultaneously keeps them cautious. In the end, you don't need to abandon your goodness. You just need to armor it. Don't let your softness become fertile ground for others to trample. Become the person others want to be close to, but never dare to take advantage of. Because you're still warm, but no longer flammable. You still love, but no longer beg to be loved. You're still kind, but you know how to preserve your final dignity. And when you live this way, you won't have to shout that you deserve respect. Others will know, because your presence will command it. You've come a long way, from those quiet inner questions like, why don't they appreciate me? To the hard truth, because I didn't know how to protect my own kindness. You once believed that to be loved, you had to be sweet, patient, and agreeable. But now you understand, no one truly loves a person who always says yes. And no one respects someone who doesn't know how to say enough. Kindness isn't wrong, but kindness without strength isn't a virtue. It's a trap. You end up in one-sided relationships. You hurt yourself out of fear of hurting others. You trade away your inner safety just to keep the label of the likable one. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to become ruthless, but he would look you in the eye and say, if you don't make others think twice, they'll learn to walk over you without guilt. And you know what? That isn't cold-hearted. It's loyalty to yourself. It's your way of saying, I'm still kind, but I'm not free of charge. I still love, but I won't accept repeated wounds. I still give, but only to those who know how to cherish it. Kindness with backbone means you're no longer afraid of losing someone, because you're no longer willing to lose yourself. And when you step into the world with that kind of energy, you won't need to shout to be heard. Your presence alone will be enough to make others reevaluate how they treat you.